It's been a while, but it's finally time to dig back into the endless well known as early access reviews. There's a ton that I've played throughout the years, some good, some bad, and some I can't even decide. With that said, welcome to the first early access review of the year, and why not start out with a bang with Gunfire Reborn, a game that has very positive ratings on Steam with no signs of slowing down. While that's all well and good, what exactly is Gunfire Reborn? In short, it's an FPS with elements of roguelikes and RPGs. Either you or up to 4 players can explore randomly generated levels. Ultimately, is this game worth the praise, or are there better underrated gems elsewhere? Off the bat, what I really like about this game is every time you start it up, you're given the roadmap of where the game is progressing for early access. Honestly, this is a great way to instill confidence in the purchase. And I really appreciate it when early access games do this. And honestly, this should be a standard going forward for early access games to communicate to the customer what exactly they should expect going forward. So the game thrusts you into the tutorial as the nameless cat. I looked more into it, and apparently he's known as the Crown Prince, so take that for what it is. You get an ability with him to freeze enemies with an orb and throw smoke grenades, and honestly this tutorial does a pretty good job of explaining the controls, mechanics, and things that you'll encounter going forward. So after the tutorial is when you can play the game properly. Basically the game is you go on adventures with procedurally generated levels, and the game is split up into 3 different areas. You have this tomb area, a desert area, and this Japan looking area. We'll get into these areas later in the review, but all of them do a pretty good job with different enemies and different challenges. So there are multiple characters to play as that you'll unlock later as you level up. But the first one you start with, like I said before, is the nameless cat, the Crown Prince, and all characters start out with a foundry, which is basically a pistol that has unlimited ammo. The weapons use one of 3 ammo types, usually normal, large, or special, and depending on the weapon will determine what ammo it uses. And weapons are usually dropped from enemies, or they can be purchased using copper from a merchant. And right now you can just carry 2 at a time. The pistol is your 3rd weapon, basically kind of like a safety weapon. And not all the guns are unlocked at the start. Completing certain tasks will unlock them for drops. So killing a certain enemy with a certain kind of elemental attack, performing critical strikes, critical hits, or defeating a certain kind of enemy. So there's a lot of replay value in terms of that, seeing what you can unlock and how that weapon will perform once you do unlock it. And when it comes to the shooting and action, it definitely feels pretty good, as the pace feels pretty good. But it does vary on each weapon. Some weapons are far more satisfying than others. My personal favorite, I love shotguns. Getting really close up to the enemy for a headshot is always satisfying to pull off. Other weapons just feel too limited in what they can do, specifically sniper rifles. Unless you have the new character, which we'll talk about later, it really doesn't feel like it's very viable for many builds. And each weapon can have a variety of inscriptions. This can be like increased accuracy, increased effective range, etc. And honestly, there's a lot to play around with me, and this is the biggest draw for me of the game, is just saying, I pick up the shotgun this time with this inscription, but then I go another run and I find it again, but it has different inscriptions entirely. So it's always cool, and it definitely varies up the gameplay that way. So the deeper you go into each level, the higher level weapons that you'll find in the game. And you can also upgrade your weapons from the craftsman, and you'll need copper to do so. The higher level basically equals higher damage input, and later on it's very important to do so to keep competitive. If not, your damage potential is going to be far below what it needs to be. Now, I mentioned before about the merchants, but weapons are not the only thing that they sell. They also can sell health, ammo, and scrolls. And all this does need copper to purchase. So as I mentioned with the merchant, there are scrolls, and scrolls you can find from chests or from enemy drops, and there are various modifiers. Some are just far more useful than others, and others just seem so situational or detrimental. Mainly by that, they'll come with some sort of penalty, such as like, okay, this will increase your fire damage, but you know, once you inflict fire, you'll be on fire as well. Stuff like that that really seems too risky. But there's other ones that lower your dash cooldown or all your ability cooldowns in general when being hit, which is incredibly useful. For every level that you beat unlocks a chest that contains a goblet, and the goblet gives you one of 3 Ascension skills to choose from, and these skills are unique to each character, and some are honestly far more overpowered than others. Mainly one of the later characters, King Yang, has this kick that if you get lucky enough, you can get plus 600% damage to it, which makes it almost instant kill for a lot of the enemies. But it's random every time, so it kind of relies on RNG, which is a problem that I have with this game. But we'll get into that later. Each level also contains secret area known as vaults. These require a skill to activate. Basically, you just shoot a crack on a wall and you're able to enter them. And these can range from a variety of things. It can either be some sort of obstacle course, or it can be like something you have to face an elite enemy. The reward is usually a scroll that may or not be worth it, so it's like a risk versus reward mechanic, at least early on. Later on, when you get strong enough, it's not as much. So the AI for the enemies is actually pretty good. Each enemy has their own behavior. Some are far more defensive, while others are far more aggressive. And some even have the ability to roll and dodge attacks, so it definitely keeps you on your toes. But it's not always perfect because sometimes the AI does get stuck regarding pathfinding, but it isn't too common. It's enough where you notice it, but it's not too much where it becomes a huge detriment. For the end of each area features a boss, and the boss can either be very easy or hard, depending on a number of variables. As I mentioned before, the weapons that you have, the current character you're playing as, the equipped scrolls, skills, etc. And usually these bosses are very hard at first to kind of figure out their patterns and what to do. But after leveling up and just gaining experience from the game, it becomes much easier on repeat playthroughs. Just like any game where you have roguelike or roguelite elements, death is a big part of this game. The game logs your runs and tracks your performance, which is pretty cool. And after dying, you can spend the soul essence that you gather in missions on skills. And this is honestly required to get far in the game to level up, and also to unlock some of the newer characters. Reaching certain levels will also grant rewards. So if you get to like level 15 or 20, it may unlock another set of skills. It can also unlock like a new character, as I mentioned before, maybe a new weapon, a scroll, etc, etc. You know, early on, I would say this game was definitely on the harder side. I really struggled a lot with the cat getting past the first boss. But once I got with the bird character, and his name is King Yang, I mean, this dude had the yeet kick of doom. As I mentioned before, like, once I was able to get his base damage on it so high and really level him up, it just became ridiculous. I mean, his kick basically restores armor. And as I mentioned before, with the add that with the 600 increase in damage. There's also other ones that do a full restore of your armor on each hit. Basically gives you like invulnerability frames after using it, and honestly, it can get pretty powerful. His secondary skill is a cleave, which also can get pretty powerful when he has a restore ammo on each kill. So basically he just has unlimited ammo. It can get crazy, trust me. So as I mentioned before, there are 3 areas in the game. I won't get too detailed on everything, but I will give a pretty good overview. The first is a tomb area, as I mentioned, which I found to be honestly the least interesting of the 3. I don't know if it's because I just played it a lot, but it really lost interest after a while, especially exploring the other ones. The enemies just consist mainly of spearmen, bowmen, etc. There's not a lot of space to maneuver in these levels, so it feels very close quarter combat and very claustrophobic as a result. And as much as I like the art style, the color palette is just drab and boring, and it doesn't do the game justice aesthetically. The second area is a desert, which is when the game became very difficult for me, mainly because the enemies take more damage and are naturally more creative. You have snipers, teleporting enemies, giant flame-throwing dudes. Honestly, it's a great variety and can be very difficult to deal with. your first time around. But the good thing I like about this place is that it's far more open, so there's far more maneuverability, and the side pieces of the levels, the vaults, are far more creative. So I definitely feel like a lot more work went into this part than in the first area. But the highlight to me is the third area, which is basically Japan. It's honestly the most creative level design here, and many unique enemies to face. The enemies have a magic, some have, use water. It's honestly a nice varied level of enemies, a lot of varied attacks going in here. And there's also a good amount of open space, and you really see more of a level of verticality that the other two don't really have. I mean, the second one has a decent amount, but you definitely see more verticality here. It just sucks that like this is the most interesting, but instead of throwing it at like having it be the first thing, you have to wait to the end, which you may or may not see it depending on your skill level. So right now, as of recording, there are 4 characters in total, and I'm going to talk about the other 2 now since I mentioned the bird and the cat. The second character you unlock is a dog called Ailbai. He has incredibly high health but very low shields. He's also faster than the cat. Honestly, the cat to me is just way too damn slow. Hopefully they can up his speed, or at least decrease the reduction of speed with certain weapons. But that's a side issue. His special ability is to dual wield weapons, and many of them are very applicable for this skill. His skills also favor explosions and high firepower, and his secondary skill consists of explosive grenades. I'm not too crazy about the dual wield ability personally. Mainly from what I've experimented, I haven't really found like the best combo yet. And you waste ammo like crazy without certain skills. But it was still fun regardless, and definitely was a nice alternative to what the cat provides. So the newest character that they have added in this game so far is Lei Luo, and this dude's powers are lightning based, and his skill tree actually favors sniper rifles. So for him, snipers are actually pretty viable. Currently he's the fastest character in the game, which is pretty awesome. And his secondary skill is chain lightning, which can hit multiple targets at once. His main skill is called fatal current, which powers him up temporarily. But once he shoots someone, it ends the state, but it does incredibly high damage. I haven't used them too much yet, but the potential is very high, and I've seen some crazy exploits with him. Right now, he's a character I'm going to use. I'm going to try to beat the game with him, and I think it's very possible. The biggest issue, and I mentioned this before with the game, as fun as it is and as many hours as I put into it, it's just the RNG nature of it all. I mean, many runs can be very trivial if the RNG gods are in your favor. If you get the right combo of weapons, skills, scroll, enemy spawns, modifiers, etc., it's way too easy. And the same is also opposite as well. If you don't get anything that you can really work with, it becomes very difficult. This honestly just needs to be rebalanced to give more of a reliance on skill and to not make it feel like you're limited by what you get. And this is not an easy task with all the content that they have now and what they have yet to add. There's going to be a lot that needs to be done, so hopefully they can find a nice sweet spot for it all, but good luck to the developers, because with all the variables here, it's not an easy task. So I was able to try the multiplayer with 50 Blades of Grey, and I played as King Yang while he played as the cat, and it was honestly really awesome to see the abilities be used in tandem. He would freeze enemies with the orb, and then I would finish him off with either a kick or a cleave. It was pretty freaking awesome. And also different guns appear for each player on drop, as well as scrolls. So it's not like you're stealing anyone else's weapon by picking it up. You press a button to share them, which is pretty cool. And one thing I will that is to be noted is that there is a decent scaling of enemies, especially bosses. Regular enemies are not too much of a problem, but bosses can be incredibly long with how much scaling they can get. So I'm going to quickly go over the presentation. The game is not very high when it comes to graphical fidelity, but I definitely enjoy the art style, and there's some really awesome artwork to see in the loading screens, and it is great. As well as the soundtrack is pretty good as well. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to purchase the soundtrack. It's not really on sale at the moment, or it's not available to be purchased at the moment, meant to say. but I did use music from another game. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Comment below if you guys know where the music is from. So yeah, not too much left to say here. Overall, it's a great foundation and a great title so far. There's a great amount of content and the replay value is very high. It's great solo and even better with friends. It's overall a fun game. But I really hope that going forward they are able to rebalance all the content, because definitely feels unbalanced at times and relies a bit too heavily on RNG. So hopefully they can fix that going forward, but overall really looking forward to the finished product. And as always, thank you for watching. This is Powerhouse signing off.